Okay, so thanks everyone for attending this MVJ webinar, aptly called Telling Stories with Your Writing and Photography. My name is Lori King and I'm the moderator for this event. This webinar features Army veteran Ben Brody. He is a director of photography for the GroundTruth Project, a nonpartisan, nonprofit media organization. He also trains and mentors early career reporters at Report for America. Ben has spent most of his career documenting the global war on terror as a military photographer, specifically in Iraq and Afghanistan, first as a soldier, then as a civilian freelancer photojournalist, working on the Ground Truth landmark multimedia project Forever Stand. For the next 45 minutes, Ben will talk about how he used his writing and photography from 15 years of working in Iraq and Afghanistan to author two successful books, Attention Service Member and 300, is it 300 millimeter? Because that's what I want to say.
300 meters.
300 meters, okay. That's
Battle Site Zero.
I want to say 300 millimeters, just like this one's to pop out of my mouth. He also will discuss other books from other military veteran authors and advise on how to define a book's concept and genre and navigate the publishing and self-publishing landscape. So, Ben, you and I basically started our careers on the same path. We both went into the Army right out of high school and pretty much had the same MOS. However, I was a 71Q, a print journalist, and you were a 46Q, a public affairs specialist. But aren't they both journalists pretty much through day?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing.
Yeah, we were the same. That meant we both went to the Defense Information School. When I went through DINFOS, it was at Fort Ben Harrison near Indianapolis, but that fort closed down in 1996. DINFOS is now at Fort Meade, Maryland, where you went to journalism school.
Oh, 03.
We both are writers and photographers, but I think our degrees tell the story of what kind of photographers we are. I have a photojournalism degree from Kent State University in Ohio, and you used your GI Bill to earn an MFA in photography from Hartford Art School. Those degrees are very different from each other, so it kind of tells us what kind of photographers we are. Let me start with education. So let's just get right into it. Let me start with education, since that is near and dear to both of our hearts. Can you explain why you went for that MFA, a more artsy degree than a traditional journalism or photojournalism degree? I think the reasoning that you told me is kind of ingenious.
Sure. Oh, thanks. Yeah, so I actually used my GI Bill first to get my undergrad in journalism through UMass Amherst. But I what can I say? I hate school. So, I convinced them to let me go work in Afghanistan, like while I was on an undergrad, and I would do independent studies and graduate on time. So anyway, after a long career of, pretty conventional photojournalism, both on the military side and as a civilian working in Afghanistan, I felt a number of different pressures. So, one of the pressures is that it's really hard to make a living as a freelance photojournalist or a staff photojournalist for that matter. Another pressure I felt was the difficulty of getting people to really look at my work and understand what I was trying to say, like get a good, get sort of a deep experience around these like representations of war. So to try and shake it up a bit, on a lark, I decided to use the rest of my GI Bill on an MFA in photography through Hartford Art School and take lessons from the practice of creating art and apply them to the profession of journalism. And where that sort of hybrid approach has sort of yielded the most benefits for me is in the making of books.
Can you delve into your two books and why and how did they come about?
Sure. So, Attention Service Member, which is right here, pretty chunky book, 304 pages. This really came from an archive of, that I had from working in like photographing the global war on terror for almost 15 years. 5 years as a soldier, and then thereafter in Afghanistan as a civilian. And so much of that work was on these sort of ephemeral sites, like these news websites where like the news organization went defunct and their website's not there anymore. Huge, ambitious multimedia projects that we poured so much money and effort into, and they were built in Flash. So, they're gone. You can't look at them anymore. Even the stuff that was printed in, newspapers and magazines, like that's still a very sort of transitory medium that nobody's going to have on their bookshelf. So there was sort of this, pathological need to create a solid object that exists in the world to sort of memorialize this work. But that's not enough to make a successful photo book. What you have to think about is, if you're going to print 1 book or 5 books or 10 books, like, yeah, your friends or family will buy them and have them and love them. But if you're going to print 1,500 books, which was the first run of Service Member, you got to think like, who are these 1,500 people who are going to trade $40 for 2.5 pounds of war pictures? And, what's the experience you're going to give them? So going to art school sort of helped me articulate what some of those, like how to navigate some of those conceptual approaches. So Attention Service Member is really, it's not just a book that explains like, here's what I saw in Iraq and Afghanistan, even though it is written from a very sort of first person diaristic perspective. But it's a book about trauma, it's about lies and propaganda, it's about censorship and self-censorship, and how all that stuff plays out to create this picture of, this generation defining war. And a war that I think has tremendous repercussions that we see in American society today. This sort of post-truth era, I felt like we were creating that era in Iraq. So that's sort of where Service Member came from. And I felt like it was sort of my final word on the global war on terror until the fall of Kabul in a year and a half ago. And during that time, myself and several other veterans who had friends and colleagues in Afghanistan were working round the clock to try and secure visas for them to get out, and also to solve the tactical problem of how do you get into the airport gates at Hamid Karzai International Airport. So 300 meters, which is this small book here, is around that experience. And it actually this is a real like sort of art book. So there's 3 pieces of it. There's this rubber band that holds it all together. There's this poppy red cover, and the text inside, which you can't see here, but it's WhatsApp chats between me and my colleagues in Afghanistan, trying to get through the gate from 300 meters away to 0. And then inside the book, it's actually an accordion book that stretches out 16 feet. These are pictures that I made during the opium poppy harvest of 2011. So it was 10 years between these pictures and the fall of Kabul. So yeah,
Wow.
it's printed on both sides. And the pictures are pictures I made with like a toy camera while I was in Afghanistan. So this is a much more sort of limited project than Service Member, which is very sort of sprawling. It's got something for everybody, and hit a wide audience, whereas this audience is more photographers, art book folks, things like that.
You mentioned to me yesterday that being an educator is very central to your practice of photography, which I guess is like giving back to the community.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it that way. You know, you and I have both taken lessons from our careers and try to use them to, you know, educate the up and coming generation. You know, we had been talking about like, do you teach technical stuff? Like, I don't teach technical stuff. Like, I refuse. But you know, I try and focus on like, how do you think about photography? How do you you know, evaluate photography's role in society and make pictures that have the impact that you want them to have. You know, how, like, what the pictures look like, that's your own business. But yeah, so but you know, I sort of came to that place where, you know, that modality of teaching you know, has all evolved over a long time through many trials and many errors. um but what really, you know, got me into education is just that, like, every time you talk to students and they ask you questions, they're educating you, like they're helping you like understand your own work so much better, forcing you to like articulate these concepts that, you know, usually I just sort of lace on my boots and walk out the front door and do it. I don't think about like why or how to explain it. So yeah, it's a practice that really goes both ways. So yeah, it's definitely been central. And also just having, you know, as a journalist, having multiple income streams, you know, being a journalist, being an editor, making books, teaching, doing fellowships, applying for grants, having all of these like chainsaws juggling in the air at once makes you more resilient as a journalist, as a photographer, as you know, a information warrior. Russell, I
Yeah,
see you smiling.
you're so busy. I mean, you do workshops and portfolio reviews, and you
Yeah.
teach a class at Williams College called Visual Literacy and Personal Vision.
Hmm.
When you told me about that class, I found it pretty interesting, your concept on teaching that, because I do teach the nuts and bolts of
Yeah.
photojournalism in my classes. Can you tell us about that class and how you teach seeing?
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. You know, especially with students nowadays who look at pictures all day long. Like, they all know how to look at photography, and you know, it's just about like, how do you articulate what's really happening? So the class is sort of focused around this idea of, when you look at a picture, what is it really saying? You know, so how to decode what a picture is actually saying. And then the class is about learning how to do that, establishing a vocabulary around that, and then making pictures that say what you're trying to make them say. So, you know, the class is basically like two pieces. Like, one is this 5 hour long knockdown, drag out critique where we look at everybody's pictures and, you know, try and refine this project into something that is conceptually sound. And then the other end of the class is looking at amazing historical and contemporary photography. Some of it really holds up and is brilliant. Some of it looks really problematic and dated. And, you know, that's just a way of like getting students into this place where they have a historical framework for the pictures that they're making. Because cool thing about photography is that, like, when you look at pictures, you're comparing them against all these other pictures that you've already seen. Like, your mind is always making those connections. Like, a cool thing about human neurology is, like, if you put two pictures next to each other, they could have nothing to do with each other. Your brain will automatically try and find connections between them. And that's like just a really amazing storytelling tool that you have. Like, you can put these pictures next to each other and create an experience for people. So showing students how to do that, how to work with imagery in a more sort of literate and, you know, articulate and intentional way, I think will steer them well no matter what they do with their lives. You know, I don't think any of my students think they're going to make a career in photography. Like you know, your students, like, they want to be photographers. So yeah, they got to learn how to like work a camera in a serious way. But you know, my students, I got them for a semester. Like, I can't teach them how to handle a camera in a semester. That takes 10 years.
It's actually teaching them how to handle a smartphone these days, to be
Oh,
honest.
yeah.
Because my students are journalists and not photojournalists. So,
Interesting.
and so that's an issue that I've had to process over the years.
I'm sure a lot of them will be double tasked as writers to, you know, make pictures as well. I teach a little course every year for Report for America that's like photography for non-photographers. Just like, so you're not a photographer, you don't care, but you got to take pictures for your story and you got to make them look decent. Here's how you can like make them a little better, you know?
Did you want to show some of your work?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Let's do it.
So I'm gonna just share my screen real quick. Oh, I think I did it wrong. So you can just see this. Stop share. I want to share my entire screen. I think I can just share this keynote. Okay, so you can see this keynote, okay?
Yes.
Okay. So starting with a selfie in Iraq. So yeah, I'll start us here. I'm a military photographer assigned to photograph combat operations for 3rd Infantry Division. I spent all of 2005 in East Baghdad from Sadr City to Salman Pak. And then during the surge, I did 16 months in, you know, the so-called Triangle of Death, the Tigris River Valley south of Baghdad. This is where this picture was taken. So this is probably my best sort of, you know, military propaganda picture. If you visit Fort Campbell, Kentucky, where the 101st Airborne here is located, you'll see this picture like plastered all over the place. You know, it's very cinematic. You know, the helicopters going overhead. You know, this is sort of like how I was instructed to represent the war. You know, you can see the soldiers are like being represented as like powerful and effective. The men in this like car bomb factory we raided, you know, being captured and controlled. That was like very much the sort of visual language that I was, you know, expected to use in my photography for the military. Yeah, so, you know, this is like pretty much what my pictures look like in Iraq. These are the kinds of products we would make, these sort of newsletters. I'm not sure how much you all already know about how like this particular kind of sausage is made. But anyway, you know, so my work would go out in sort of these mass press release blasts. They would also be used for our like sort of internal newspapers. So after my first enlistment, which was 5 years, but I got one free, got stop lost for a year. I mean, no big deal. I got out, went to UMass on the GI Bill, immediately discovered that like going to classes was not for me, who was at that time a 28-year-old Iraq veteran. So I went to Afghanistan. So, you know, here's a picture of me and Mazar-e Sharif, the civilian, obviously. And I started working in Afghanistan in a really similar way to how I worked in Iraq. Like I would embed with soldiers, I would go out on combat operations, I would make pictures looking for, you know, the sort of most violent and kinetic, craziest outposts, because like that stuff I could sell. You know, I was also able to do things I wasn't able to do as a soldier. Like, you know, this is a Taliban security chief who I, you know, spent the day with and photographed. Like, that's not something you could do in uniform. You know, you can see like sort of the visual language of these pictures is pretty conventional photojournalism, like what I had been doing before. This was an assignment I did for the AARP, actually, American Association of Retired People. I found this helicopter pilot who was a Vietnam veteran, door gunner in Vietnam, learned how to fly helicopters in '79, and then retired, and then came back like 10 years later to fly in Afghanistan for the 101st. Yeah, making portraits of soldiers. You can see that sort of feedback loop where, photographers take pictures of soldiers, then, Hollywood and video games sort of amp it up, and then soldiers see that stuff and they sort of respond in kind and want to be represented in the same way. That was, one of the things I found interesting there. So obviously the soldiers, playing at Rambo, trying to take pictures of war that people didn't expect so much, soldiers playing video games. Sorry. I get asked a lot, so like, how did you get tricked into joining the army and then like brainwashed once you were in? And, so I tried to make pictures that like explain that, like, these young men obviously wanted to go to war. Like, these are 3 privates after their first firefight in Afghanistan, and they're like responding to it in this way. And like, the only way you can get this picture where like there's this beautiful sunset and like, I've been in this situation like 10 times. I've only been in this situation once where there was like gorgeous light. So, you kind of got to do it a lot to get the pictures. So that's the thing I felt like I had with, this body of work, was this sort of depth of coverage that was unique because I had just spent so long there. This is a little 3-image sequence where, again, you can talk about like pictures that don't have anything to do with each other, finding connections. So we've got like the 777 firing 155. You can see the shell coming out, soldiers playing football. It's like incoming with the shadow. And then this picture of a rocket attack on an aircraft hangar as the splash. So it's a way of like just throwing something in there, like adding a little bit of value to your sequence. But then I started, getting sort of frustrated with that approach to journalism and, the way that sort of public affairs apparatus would try and, shape the narrative, because like the way the embed program works is you share risk and housing and like terrible food and deprivation with the soldiers, and the sort of military's calculus is that like by doing that, like that creates bonds of affection between the journalist and the soldier, thus resulting in more positive coverage. And it was, I'm sorry, I see there's something in the chat, but I can't see what it is.
It says, you miss DFAC food.
I do miss DFAC food. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, I have some of it in my book. Like I photographed a bunch of DFAC food. Oh,
DFAC.
I cannot be trusted to like eat in a DFAC. I'll just have like a cheeseburger and onion rings and cookies and a burrito all at once. So, I tried to like start focusing more on sort of that information warfare aspect of the equation, photographing these like motivational posters and, changing the meaning of them by like, putting it in the context of the HESCO barriers and concertina wire. Photographing the sort of like, how do you photograph the essential absurdity of the premise of trying to reshape Afghanistan and America's like socio-political, economic, military image. Like the lessons of the Vietnam War seem to have been lost completely. So yeah, I found myself trying to make these pictures that ask more questions than they answer, taking pictures that are less literal and just sort of engender conversation. Um, and then, you know, after 15 years of doing this, I'm like totally smoked. And the war in Afghanistan's wrapping up. So, and I'm like done with war. I like can't take it anymore. So I go to art school, learn how to make photo books to keep myself sane in the program. You know, I made a photo book like about the art school itself, like making fun of it, you know, like people kneeling before the program leader and stuff like that. This was my secret project that I just made this book and handed it to everybody at graduation. Nobody like knew I was making it. Um, I found like my work from as a soldier being used in all these crazy ways because like all our military photography is in the public domain. Since 2004, you can find pretty much all of it on dividshub.net, DVIDS, if you're not familiar. And by reverse Google image searching this picture, I was able to find it in all these crazy places, like selling vape pens, you know, put in dialogue with like anime and video games, selling batteries, you know, associated with this like unintentional poetry, like, can we get a war thread going? Awesome. So, you know, all these things like being in art school, like helped me sort of think about like, maybe there's something there, maybe there's something revealing there. Um, and all that stuff sort of put together. This is just like a little book I made on an inkjet printer and, you know, had bound at a local copy shop. There's only one of them. This is another little book I made with like pictures I stole off of like veterans and soldiers publicly available Facebook pages. You know, there's only one of these. But these little projects got me thinking about like how I could do my own book. And I felt like there was one piece missing. Instead of all this, just like the sort of chaos of the battlefield and the absurdity of it and the weirdness of the messaging, I felt like there was something missing, that it wouldn't be grounded. And in that, I found like photographing my home, like the beautiful place I live and my loved ones, in this way that conveyed the effect that having such a long experience at war, like how it just changes you permanently. It changes how the world itself looks. So I tried to photograph how the world looks to me, you know, like, yeah, it's like a beautiful cloud over a mountain, but in context with all these war pictures, you know, to me, it looks like the aftermath of an airstrike. You know, the demolition derby in my town, looks like a grenade or IED going off. You know, the sort of truth of this picture, the truth of this picture was that like these are my, like that's my niece and her dad like having a wonderful time at his wedding. This is my niece and her cousin like horsing around, but that's not like how the pictures read. They're like menacing and like there's this sort of dread around them. And I felt like with this, in concert with the war photography, I had the makings of a book. So I went back through my old pictures from Iraq that actually were never published, that, you know, didn't make it through the sort of censorship filter, and found all of this stuff that like, I don't even remember taking half of these pictures. But they really hit on that like insane absurdity, like throwing beanie babies to like kids in Sadr City where we had like just gotten car bombed like the day before. You know, these weird pictures, you know, like an airdrop in the desert. You know, like obviously these pictures had no functionality for the military public affairs idea about, you know, their messaging. But I felt like they did have a function for a broader representation of the war in a book. Um, So how this stuff all came together into a book is like, first I looked at a lot of other books. And oh yeah, this is just some of the, sorry, I'm not doing this. I'm trying to do this really quick. This is like an hour and a half presentation when I do it slow. So I looked at a lot of other photography books. So like Vietnam Inc. by Philip Jones Griffiths is like sort of one of the like foundational photojournalism books, covering the Vietnam War, covering the US and South Vietnamese military at that time as though they were a corporation, which was really groundbreaking. War Porn by Christoph Banger, which is a book about censorship and self-censorship, which I wanted to talk about, but his book is so gory. It's really hard to look at. And I wanted to make like, so how can we talk about this stuff in a book that like people would actually want to look at? Tim Hetherington's Infidel, which is like a brilliant book about a platoon of soldiers in Kunar province in 2007. It was basically the companion to the film Restrepo. And it's an amazing book, but it makes this sort of argument that like combat creates these like unshakable bonds of brotherhood that I found really sort of simplistic or problematic. I mean, my own experience in like brutal combat in Iraq was that like I didn't want to be anybody's friend. Like they were dying like flies. Like I didn't want to get to know anyone. So yeah, so poking some holes in that. And then, you know, Shooter by Stacey Pearsall, also a military photographer, which is a really different book from mine as well. So I printed all my pictures out, just like cheap 4x6 prints, tacked them to a wall, and just sort of saw what I had. Started working with sequences. I talked with other photographers who had also made photo books. That's Peter Van Ogsmail on the left and Glenna Gordon on the right, who both had made photo books that I really respected. They helped me sort of organize the ideas and like what pictures belonged in the book. So like, this is a big book, you know, 304 pages. There's like 160, 170 pictures in it, but that's edited down from what, like 120,000. So this is like a very narrow edit. And the way I, you know, found that edit was by defining what I wanted the book to be about and finding pictures that supported those arguments. You know, showing it to my friends. That's Nick Nichols. He's like the National Geographic photographer who does like the lions and gorillas and chimpanzees. And then, you know, once I had like a really solid book concept, what I started doing, I'm just gonna try and find the chat. Oh man, I'm sorry, I cannot. Okay, there we go. So now is the chat like in front of what I'm saying?
I don't, I
Okay.
pulled up the chat, but I don't see the chat you're seeing.
Okay, never mind.
So you're good to go.
Okay, so anyway, I started pitching book designers. So I pitched designers who had worked on photo books that I really liked. And so this is me talking with Jeroen Kummer and Max Walbers, who like wound up designing Attention Service Member. And what I did is I sent them a PDF of my sort of rough idea. You know, it wasn't like super well designed. I am not a book designer, but it was just to give them a sense of like, what are the materials we're working with? Like, what is the text? What are the pictures? And what are some ideas about how this book could be sort of organized? Like, what does it do? And then, so I pitched probably 5 designers. And, you know, I went with the ones who I felt like really understood what the book was trying to do. And, you know, were excited about being a part of it. So yeah. And then, you know, together we came up with sort of the final sequence. Yeah, and then hired a printer who could handle the project, went to Amsterdam, where they do really good printing and, more importantly, really good binding. Because for me, like, the whole point of making a book is that it's like this tactile object that, you hold it in your hands, you flip through the pages. What is that experience like? The paper choices and the binding have a tremendous amount to do with that. This is less important with like a book of text, but like with a photo book, it's really important. So yeah, I actually brought a piece of like an MRE, like the cardboard for an MRE, to Amsterdam to like find the cardboard that we could print on that was the closest to it. So yeah, service member looks kind of like an MRE. It's about the same sort of size and shape. It's made to sort of look like a cheap field manual type, mass produced thing. So like that sort of design was really important in showing the reader like what the book is really about like using every aspect of the object to communicate the central ideas. And like I said, I thought I was done there, but during the fall of Afghanistan, JP, who's on this call, was there. It all came flooding back. So this is text I got and pictures that I got, and myself and a bunch of other veterans pooled our resources and contacts to try and help our friends and colleagues in Afghanistan. So this is just sort of the visual imagery around that. Some of the memes that were popping up, like you can see like the Taliban on the top, like making like the famous Joe Rosenthal Iwo Jima photo, like recreating that in Afghanistan. And then I had these crazy 360-degree panoramic pictures that I had never done anything with, and I felt like it could kind of be a good fit for this project. So this was a much sort of shorter process making this book, but you can see like the text on the right is the WhatsApp chat. In the middle panel, there's a bit of my own text about, what the book is about, acknowledgements, colophon, and, getting the cover as close to a opium poppy red as we could. And yeah, it's a cool little object. So that is my work. We're now at 5:40, so I think I've gone over a little bit. I'd love to, oh yeah, Dan, now I can see the chat. Yeah, Dan's saying that Infidel is one of the best photo books of all time. Absolutely. Cool. So I would love to like take questions. I'm an open book about how this stuff works. If there's something I haven't touched on that you want to know more about, dive deeper into, happy to get at it. Does that work for you, Laurie?
Yes, great. Works for me.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I've got Fabit here, which is a book made by David Abrams, where like he, he was my boss, my first tour in Iraq. He was like the division PAO, and I knew he was writing a book. What I didn't know is that he was taking all of my like press releases and turning them in, like all the outside the wire stuff in the book is me. So there was stuff I didn't even remember. And when I read his fictionalized version of it, I was like, right. Oh yeah, that was crazy. But this Fabit was a successful book. And I know he did that by, pitching a manuscript to agents and, refining it down and editing it until it was an object that exists in the world. Now, self-publishing is also like very much an option. I think self-publishing is more legit for photo books than for text, because the production of a textbook like this is really cheap. You know, you can knock these out, like anyone can print them. You can make a bajillion of them. They're going to look great. So the problem is distribution. And, you know, you need to move a lot of these to make the sort of numbers work. So you need like a publisher and a proper publisher and a proper distributor in order to make it work. Photography books are at a way smaller scale. So Carlos is asking how many copies of the book have been printed. So David's book, working with daylight. Yeah, don't work with daylight. That's a photo book publisher that just they ask for $30,000 of your money and you'd never see it again. Now, Service Member cost me $30,000 to make. I self-published it through Red Hook Editions and then Mass Books, which is my publishing imprint. But I got 1,500 copies of Service Member for $32,000, like total. You know, the printing wasn't the whole part of that cost, but the design and flying to Amsterdam and, you know, all the different people I had to pay to do stuff that I couldn't do myself cost 32 grand. So that puts the cost per unit per book at about $21. And I was selling it for 40 or like 45 with it signed, or like 125 with a print, or like 350 with a special edition with a slipcase that cost me about 90 bucks a piece to make. So that meant I had to sell about 600 books to break even, which was always my goal, breaking even. And I was confident I could sell 600 books. And I got really lucky, and it got a lot of attention in the media, what eventually just sort of blew it up is this New Yorker article, which really opened it up to a broader audience beyond other photographers and people who are very interested in photo books. Yeah, so that's 1,500 for Service Member. That sold out in 5 months, shockingly. And then I did a second run of 2,500. I've probably got 1,000 of those left. That's intended to be like the last time I print it. So like 1,000 books should last me the rest of my life. 300 meters, I printed 600 of these. There's probably 100 of them left. I printed less of these because I felt like it had a very like narrow audience. You know, I wasn't going to be able to pitch this to like random veteran or like random person who's like interested in the subject matter. This was for like my sort of core audience, which I would describe as about 250 people. My like family, maybe another 40 books. Thanks, Dan. And then like hopefully I can move some more units with like media coverage. And soliciting media coverage is actually a pretty simple formula if you are working in with themes that are covered in the mass media. So if your subject matter is war, it is like veterans, trauma, if your subject matter is the media loves writing about the media. Service Member is like about the media. So like it really hooked them in there. And especially like issues that are expensive and difficult and time consuming for them to cover. Well, if they can get all that stuff in their pages by just reviewing your book, that's the easy way to get a book review. It's just that like, you know, when you make a photo book that's like a bunch of, you know, beautiful pictures of landscapes and stuff, that stuff's not covered in the mass media. Like it's you know, that's not going to hook them. So it's about, you know, finding a way of engaging the media and engaging the audience that the mass media serves. Is sort of the ticket to getting, you know, press coverage. Down to one stock on Amazon? Oh no, that's just Detlef Autumn. He's like the Amazon dude. You can buy it from me off of Amazon for cheaper. So what's next for me? Another book on the horizon. I just came out with this. Give me a minute. Like, I don't have
You know,
another
you've
book.
got the book bug, so you never know.
I love making books. But so I started a publishing imprint with my friend Peter Van Ogtmail, and we've been actually publishing other people's books. So we just did a great book with Gabriella and Gotti Jones called I Just Want to Surf. That is really great. I'll just put a link to this article in Vogue that covers her book. Got a couple new ones, other ones on the horizon. But yeah, I don't know. Is anyone here like interested in making a book of your like writing, like a memoir? You know, attention service member is like the text is written in the first person. It's kind of like a memoir. And that was not because I think my experience as a soldier was something really special or unique that deserves memorialization. Actually, I think kind of my whole thing is that like I was a totally ordinary soldier in the 3rd Infantry Division doing a very typical series of tours at a very specific time. I was not like a Navy SEAL or like a CIA operative or a famous journalist. You know, this book is from the perspective of a regular guy. And the reason I did it that way was as like a point of entry for people into this world that can often seem very exotic and difficult to understand. That it's like, let me just like take you through it, you know, in the first person. Dan, you got a question?
Yeah, first off, like super cool. Thanks for doing this. Always will take time to learn more about how you made service member and stuff. So with 300 meters, like when you revisited those pictures, did you kind of get the feeling that it was like immersive in the way it was? Because the first time I looked at those spreads, it almost felt like I was like putting myself back in like the Argandab on a patrol. Did it hit you like a different way, I guess, when you were looking at it? I guess my second question would be like, how has the balance been between making books with your imprint and doing the work that you're doing with GroundTruth and RFA?
Ooh, balance. Yeah, I have no balance. But so I think like the sort of immersiveness of 300 meters is not something that just like sprang out of nowhere in my mind. It came from a familiarity with the medium of accordion books. And the link I just put in the chat is to Joe Sacco's book, The Great War, which I highly recommend. So Joe Sacco is a graphic novelist who like, he's a journalist who uses graphic novels as his medium, just as I use photo books as my medium. And he made a graphic novel in an accordion format that is one continuous illustration of the Battle of the Somme in World War I. And it takes you through like the sort of main 36 hours of the battle in one continuous illustration. And I mean, talk about something that is like totally divorced from my understanding. Like I've never been in high intensity combat, like high intensity defined by like an entire nation's economic output is focused on war. Like, yes, I have been in very intense combat, but like economically speaking, we were an afterthought. So, you know, I'd never been in like a World War I, like trench warfare kind of situation, but the way he presented that in just an illustration brought me right into it. So I felt like, you know, that sort of familiarity with the work that has been done and the work that really impacted me informed how I pursued that project. And I felt like those long 360-degree panoramics were well suited to the accordion format. It would have been pretty weird if I had tried to make Attention Service Member as like an accordion book. It would be pretty finicky and fussy, and yeah.
I'm curious to know how you came up with the titles to your books.
Oh yeah, sure. So Attention Service Member, I actually have, oh, those defect pictures. Oh yeah, Dan, you've seen those. So Attention Service Member, I can show you where that came from. Let me just find it real quick. And actually, some of you like may already know this. So this is a postcard that I received about 6 or 7 months after I had left the military. Like, I was growing a beard, I was like out. And I got this postcard with this absurd threat: time to re-enlist. Failure to respond could result in discharge. It's like, homie, I've been discharged. And you know, I didn't know, like at the time, this was 2008, that was going to be the title of a book, but it always stuck with me as this like amazing artifact of that time. So that's where it came from. And then 300 meters was the distance from the airport where it started to get crazy. Like, we could navigate our folks up to 300 meters away from the airport, and like we didn't have to have like eyes on, like, you know, coordinating intelligence to like get them to the safest route. Like, they could get to 300 meters, no problem. 300 meters to zero was like every meter needed to be like scrutinized and agonized over. So that's sort of where that title came from. Yeah. John, did you have a question?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I appreciate this. So I'm a first-time, I guess, pre-author. I have 3 books with manuscripts and proposals, either veteran or Afghanistan related. And I guess I'm sort of lost in the mix of the best way to go about if you're a first-time author. Like, I was going to release a short version online through like Amazon Kindle, and then maybe have a longer version go through the formal channels. But I'm wondering if there are any veteran routes where, like, if I don't have $30,000 on hand, are there routes that can look at your manuscript, kind of front load it to people that can read it, maybe not go through the highest channels, but is there a way to jump the chain of command here, so to speak, when it comes to publishing? Because the whole world seems to be pretty baffling when it comes to trying to get something out there.
For sure. So just to be clear, I assume we're talking about text. Is that right?
Yeah, these books could be printed on, they could be self-published online, but they are mostly text. There's some photos from like
Yeah.
what I took instant, but they're predominantly text. They could be hardcover,
Okay.
paperback, or online.
Yeah. So so the $30,000, that's like that's where photography is really like centered in the book. You're looking at like prices like that. Text for self-publishing, like a printed textbook, the costs are way less. The problem is, how are you going to move them? So I think sort of the typical strategy in this day and age is to build your audience first. And that comes from like publishing excerpts of the book. Like Warhorse is great for people like building that audience. Like, I think they already have the audience you're trying to reach. And like, that's a way of sort of building that core audience. Op-eds, another thing. So like on significant anniversaries, like it was just recently the 20th anniversary of the Iraq invasion, things like that, like op-eds, like, you know, Washington Post, New York Times, like LA Times, these big outlets are always looking for stuff like that to fill those pages. So that's another way to do it. You know, Kindle publishing, I think, it's like deceptively easy. It is incredibly easy to like publish a book and get it out there, like using that format. It doesn't make it any easier, like drawing sort of eyeballs to that project. So, you know, I think short of finding an agent who can, you know, shop your book to publishers, I think like sort of the key thing is building your audience and also like reaching out to other authors whose books you admire. Like I just read Will Macklin's book, Bringing Out the Dog. I just like randomly read it. I don't usually get into that like sort of DevGru type memoir, but it's a rad book. And so I just like searched my email, and he had actually like reached out to me about Service Member a few years ago, and we had chatted a little bit. And so I was like, dude, I just like read your book and it's like amazing. So we were talking, and it's like, now I know somebody who is like, has a contact at Penguin Press. That is like a legit thing. And like, you can email Will Macklin, like his email is not like hard to find. You know, good luck emailing Tim O'Brien. Like that's not going to happen.
Right.
But you know, just building your network, I think. Where I would start.
Is there a best way to get your excerpts out there, like sample chapters or things that might be relevant to a target audience? That sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, pitch them to outlets that carry that stuff. The Warhorse like immediately pops to mind because they just had a big symposium over the weekend. But Task and Purpose is another outlet that you know carries a lot of that stuff. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Cool.
Probably have time for one more question.
Russ, I saw you had your hand up. What you got?
I was kind of asking something similar to the last one, but I'm just curious about your outreach and pitching process to these outlets. Partly because that's something that MVJ can help with. I think we have Devin on the call now, who's really knowledgeable about some of our partnerships and stuff. But I just wondered if you could share some of the experiences and maybe the frustrations that you had in trying to pitch for people to share different excerpts or.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely hard. You know, for every like, you know, explosive success like the New Yorker, there were, you know, many like, you know, this is a hot mess. Like, we're not gonna like publish any of this. Or just like, yeah, you know, we used to write about stuff like this, but we just like don't anymore. So yeah, you're going to get a lot of rejections, but it's really not a referendum on the quality of the work. It's more about like, what are the priorities of that outlet that particular week, because they shift rapidly. Yeah, so persistence is definitely key, casting a wide net, having an understanding of like what the outlets are who carry this stuff. I can't really speak to like how useful social media is in this. It seems like every year it's like less useful. I don't even use Twitter or you know, TikTok or anything like that. I kind of use Instagram. But you know, selling books is not really, you're not going to move units on Instagram, except for like what I described as like your friends and family and, you know, that sort of core audience, which is always going to be pretty small.
You know, one thing I found funny is you were featured in the New Yorker in a 2020 article, and the headline was "Relentless Absurdity: An Army Photographer Censored Images."
Yeah, I didn't write that headline. It's definitely got some clickbait going on.
Yeah, it's like, okay, relentless absurdity. All right.
Yeah, I mean, that was sort of my takeaway. You know, whenever like it seemed like things were making sense in Iraq or Afghanistan, I would always have like that tunnel vision like radically realigned by like some, you know, completely absurd or ridiculous thing that would just like blow it all up. Yeah, I mean, I felt like that sort of feeling really defined that experience for me. And I had a very broad experience in war. Like, you know, I was public affairs. Like I could, like my second tour when I was an NCO, like I could go into General Petraeus's like briefings in Baghdad, figure out like what was going on everywhere, jump on a helicopter and be like, yo, Lieutenant, like I'm with you for the next 2 weeks. You know, if you don't like it, you can take it up with a division CG. So yeah, I had like access to like every level. And, you know, when you just have that sort of broad view of it, it's just mayhem, you know?
Is there anything else you'd like to add, or any other questions anybody has?
I just love to thank everybody for being here and all your great questions. Yeah, I really appreciate it. And please feel free to reach out to me if you got a book project, particularly around photography. Yeah, I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to read what you got.
All right, well, that wraps it up for this webinar with photojournalist and author Ben Brody. Thank you for spending an hour with our MVJ members, and have a nice night, everybody.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.